conversation, I guess. So today's session is all about menopause and anxiety, and yes, this is another one that is pretty close to my own experiences, and I will be sharing a little bit about that. Hi Andrea, hi Tracy, hi Gemma. So I have a question for you, okay? As usual, I'm starting with a question. Studies have shown that between 50 to 95% of people in perimenopause report anxiety-related symptoms. Is this something you relate to? So is it something that you've experienced? Do you relate to this idea that a large number of people would talk about anxiety in perimenopause? Give me a number. 0, never had any anxiety. 5, one of my biggest problems. Yes, Andrea, yes, absolutely. So 0 to 5, give me a kind of scale of where you are with the anxiety. For me, I definitely had anxiety. I don't think I recognised it for a very long time until burnout hit, but definitely I was there. A 5. Yeah, 5, I'm with you there. Good evening, everyone. I'm literally now off to yoga class, so hoping to watch later. Have a great yoga class, Tanya. That will help with stress and anxiety massively, and depression and anxiety. It's one of those things that is very, very good for you, so enjoy that. Catherine, you're saying a 1. That's good. Hi, Catherine. So not really there for you, Catherine. 3 to 4, depending on what situations. Absolutely, Gemma. Situations do make a big difference. And level of stress, for example, and what it is, because there's so many different sorts of anxiety, aren't there? And one of the things I think they've realised increases during menopause for a lot of people is social anxiety. And there might be a lot of societal and cultural issues around that. But that could change in a flash. Yeah, I think that's where I would have said I was, Antonia, as well, that I know I've been 1 and I've been 5. And those who know me very well, Catherine, would say that I definitely hit a 5 for an intense period of time. But I wasn't that level to start with. So what I want to look at today is what is anxiety, why it might be more prevalent in perimenopause, and I'm saying might or may, because there's still a little bit of a research gap here, but that's not unlike more like 20. Yeah, I think I probably was off the scale in a big way, wasn't I, Catherine? The reason I say might be linked to perimenopause is probably not to do with the fact that the information is kind of varied, but more to the fact that, like a lot of other women's things that only affect women, it's not really been researched. And anxiety in general affects women more than it affects men. And there may well be some reasons for that, which we'll talk about later. Although it's not stated in the research, there's certainly things that might suggest it. There are links to anxiety and the levels of anxiety previously experienced. So we're going to look at that as well, and how your previous experiences of anxiety may increase your risk of experiencing anxiety in menopause. It links to things that we've already talked about, because last week's was on stress, and stress and anxiety are massively linked. Depression is linked to anxiety, but it doesn't have to. It can have one without the other. But stress and anxiety, stress is a trigger for anxiety, so definitely linked. And in terms of my 6 steps for a positive menopause mindset, we're really talking about the things that I suggested in the physical step, in the connection step, and in the awareness step of those 6 steps. And I'll explore that a little bit later and why. Just a word of warning in advance. If your anxiety is severe and you are struggling with it a lot, I would recommend seeking medical advice. However, if it's moderate, it impacts occasionally, there are things that we can do. Some of them are in our control, some of them we might feel aren't, and that's when mindset comes in a particular way. So I've alluded to my own journey with anxiety, and I think it's important really to explore that. As Catherine has said, I was probably more like 20 on my 0 to 5 scale. I first started sort of I experienced anxiety for the first time in perimenopause, but at the time I had no idea what was happening to me. Yeah, I get that, Andrea. I think that's where I would say I was sat for a while. When I really look back, I can say that as a young adult, while at university, there was a period of time, very short period of time, where I was suffering from panic attacks. I've always had, well, not always, but that's when my issue with falling off mountains, or potentially falling off mountains, also started to develop, well, actually late teenagehood, early adulthood, that became quite extreme and hit pinnacle in the last few years, probably linked to all the other things that I've had going on for me. But the panic attack started again last year, but that was when my stress hit extreme levels. And I'd never experienced them to the degree where I couldn't get out of my car, I couldn't get out of my house, and they were really paralyzing me, but I didn't know what was going on. So I guess, I know what that's been like. I have had both counselling and CBT. CBT, I think, was incredibly helpful. And because of the scale of 20, as Catherine says, of my anxiety at the end of last year, medication as well. So now it was interesting because when we were on holiday, I didn't experience any of my "that's too steep, I'm going to fall off that mountain" experience that I'd had before. And I felt very calm with the event that I did as well. So I think probably I've got a lot of that under control. And some of that is knowledge, some of that is actions that I take, and some of that is my age. I'm pretty certain it is. If any of what I'm saying is familiar to you, or you just fancy a conversation to chat to somebody else who really understands what you're going through, happy to connect. So just message me off air and we can connect up just for a chat. I'm not a therapist. I'm never going to claim to be a therapist. But I can share, my own story and maybe support others through that. So here comes the science, Antonia. You love your science. I know you do. It's your favourite subject, isn't it? So here we go. Evidence for links to hormones, because this is what I thought I'd start looking for, given the fact that it's it's one of the most reported symptoms during perimenopause. So it's well worth a look for the evidence. So I looked at reviews where they'd looked at evaluation that had been done before, tests that had been done before, brought loads of them together and looked at the overall impact in terms of that. And from that, there's a real clear signal that cultures have a massive impact on how people feel, whether they report being anxious. And we've talked about that nearly as much as drawing, definitely a little bit less than Latin. Well, to be fair, Antonia, Latin, you see, is where I would say that's lower. So I think we're going to agree to differ there. Latin's probably down the bottom of my list. But I can quote a quote from Ovid: "Quantum decoris corpore et vultugeris, si vocem haberes nolat prior ales foret." Don't ask me what it means. I think it's about foxes, or no, wolves, but I don't know what it means. So there you go. So going back to where I was, cultures make a difference. And we know that cultures with different attitudes to menopause, there's a different stress. Stop it. Amawa masamat, shall I decline the verb I love? I don't know. I do know some Latin, I just don't like it. So in China, only 13% of women report any anxiety symptoms during perimenopause. In Brazil, that's 58%. I started it. No, she mentioned Latin. I can quote Shakespeare: "The quality of mercy is not strained, it droppeth like a gentle rain upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed, it blesses him that gives and him that takes." That's from Merchant of Venice, and I could continue with that one, but never mind, I did it for O-level, and that tells you my age. In Brazil, it's 58%. So we did say, cultures influence how you experience menopause. Surveys in the UK, the latest survey in the UK said 65%. And overall across the world, 51%, because the Western world makes up most of the respondents. Can we get back on track? I am now back on track. So, culture is important because I think how we perceive ourselves can influence when we start going into... Hello, Tricia, nice to see you. How we perceive ourselves when we're going into menopause, perimenopause, can impact particularly social anxiety. Because if we start to see ourselves as unworthy, as maybe not looking as good, looking old, looking ugly, we become socially anxious. And that's more and more likely in cultures like ours. There's also a massive link between stress and anxiety. And we know that we have a culture that puts a high label of quality. You are amazing if you're hustling all the time, and that's high stress. And unfortunately, the more stress you've got, the higher levels of anxiety. So stress is and in cultures, and attitudes in cultures can make a difference to how we report and experience anxiety. One of the other things that's very, very clear is previous experience of anxiety. So if you had anxiety, hi Yvonne, nice to see you. If you had anxiety if you get PMS with anxiety, then there's a bigger link. If you had anxiety with postnatal depression, again, so this is the hormone experience. If you have anxiety that varies with your hormone levels, then you've got an increased chance of anxiety during perimenopause. And equally, if you have a general level of low anxiety premenopause, not zero but low, so subclinical, there is an increased menopause anxiety risk in perimenopause. And interestingly, the rates of anxiety are kind of reported at the highest in the early stages of perimenopause, just as the hormone fluctuation starts to kick in, and at the late stages, just when it's coming to the end. So I think there's probably big differences in hormones at that point, and that's where they kick in. If you already have high levels of anxiety, if you're already clinically anxious, there's no evidence to suggest that anxiety will increase in menopause. It'll still be there. It won't change in terms of its level, and it may well decrease post-menopause. So those levels may well decrease. And bearing in mind what I've just said about culture and the impact on anxiety, and then hormones and previous experience on hormones and anxiety, the question really lies, is it physiological or psychological? And I would argue that it's a mixture of both, and that there is evidence for both. So I've got a question for you now, because I haven't actually said what anxiety looks like or feels like. And I'm curious about what symptoms you associate with anxiety. So just let me know, because this affects how we report it. Because if we associate certain symptoms, we might report anxious. If we don't associate those symptoms with anxiety, we might not report ourselves as anxious. So just let me know in the chat, what sorts of things do you associate with anxiety? Okay, and I'll come back to that in terms of your list later on, when you've had a chance to let me know what you think. So you can have anxiety with depression, and it can be separate. So it can be separately diagnosed. Okay, so let's have a look at the physiological side of things. So the things that are going on in your body, and obviously this is linked to our hormone balance. And one of the things we talked about with stress was that estrogen and cortisol are linked. So when you've got high cortisol, you've got lower intrusive thoughts, sweaty and palpitations. Yes, yeah, those make sense to me. Worrying what others think, worried what's going to happen, fear of the unknown. Palpitations, yes. Throat panic, yeah. So there's a really good symptoms coming up there. I'll come back to those in a minute. But estrogen moderates cortisol levels. So when we have high levels of estrogen, which also linked to where it comes in PMS, because right at the start, leading up to ovulation, high levels of estrogen, we feel better because our cortisol levels, our stress hormones are lower. There's also a direct link between testosterone and anxiety. So high levels of testosterone lead to lower levels of anxiety. My question is this why there's a higher rate of anxiety in women rather than men? It's a question. I don't know the answer to that. So that's the physiological, hormonal differences. There's a little bit more complexity to that, but let's keep it simple. Essentially, less estrogen, more cortisol, more anxiety. Cortisol and stress, so we need to reduce stress. And so that's the next one. Stress can come from day-to-day things in your life. It may be life changes. It may be, it could be stress at work. There's all sorts of things that can cause stress. And you could have increased social anxiety for all sorts of reasons, but it can also be from what you're eating. So certain foodstuffs will increase the release of stress hormones, and we've talked about these before, including high sugar, high ultra-processed foods, those sorts of things, caffeine and alcohol. They will lead to an increase in cortisol and therefore an increased risk of anxiety, because anxiety comes from the release of our fight, flight, freeze hormone cortisol and others that within that. So more details on that were last week. So when cortisol levels increase, we also talked about during perimenopause, our body is trying to adapt to the reduced estrogen production in our ovaries until that ceases, and it gets its estrogen from elsewhere. And one of those places is the adrenal glands, which release cortisol. If we're constantly stressed, so stress, this system is designed for fight, flight, freeze, designed to keep us safe in that respect. But when stress becomes chronic, our cortisol levels remain high, which means our adrenal glands cannot produce estrogen. So therefore, we feel like we're constantly in fight, flight, freeze. Hence, those symptoms that you're talking about here in terms of wanting to make us ready to run away, to fight for our lives, or to hide. Those essentially are the things that it's trying to help us do. So stay frozen. But there's another way, and I said to you and I earlier, another hormone that makes a difference, because there's a hormone called oxytocin that will reduce your at risk of anxiety and lower your stress, because it lowers your stress. And we release oxytocin when we hug, when we stroke pets, when we're speaking to pets. It's contact and relationships that's really important for oxytocin, and that's why it relates to the connectedness step on the 6 steps. Because oxytocin, if we can moderate our stress hormones by releasing oxytocin. So we need to be very careful about that. Now, there's another interesting link in terms of anxiety in the science. It's often reported alongside high levels of vasomotor symptoms. So, for example, those are the night sweats and the hot flashes. So, but anxiety can also lead to those sorts of symptoms, because the levels of estrogen in our body moderates our system for testing temperature in our body, for keeping our temperature level. And when that's out of kilter, then we get more of those. So whether the increased levels of vasomotor symptoms cause the anxiety, because if you're sweating a lot and you're nervous about that, then that could cause anxiety, or whether it's the anxiety that causes the vasomotor symptoms is, for me, I haven't seen evidence one way or the other, but they are definitely linked. There's a link, but there's not necessarily causation there. There is a higher level of risk of anxiety if you have surgical menopause or early menopause. And I think that might be to do with anxiety about yourself rather than actually necessarily hormonal levels, but it could be. Okay. So let's go to the symptoms that you were coming up with. Okay. And I'm going to go through this list and see what you've put, because there's been some brilliant ones. So intrusive thoughts, sweaty and palpitations. That's brilliant, Jane. One of the things we've talked about before is how the dialogue that goes on in our brain can really affect the physical symptoms we feel, because those signals, those chemical signals, only last 90 seconds. But the overall effect of that emotion on our body, the physical symptoms can continue when our brain says this is an ongoing threat. And when we have intrusive thoughts, things that we don't want to hear, and I was really struggling with those, wasn't I, Catherine, those intrusive thoughts, and I was believing them as well, then we're basically sending our stress hormone, our stress system into overdrive. So therefore we do get the sweats, we get the palpitations, because we've got high levels of threat perceived. Used to have palpitations, blank mind, couldn't think straight, then used to vomit. Yeah, nausea is one of the ones that is clearly identified as well. And this is because, and many of you will have experienced the butterflies when you're going to an exam or something, you're going to do something that's a little bit scary. And that's because our stress, when we're going to get ready for fight, flight, freeze, what we want is really good blood flow to our muscles, high levels of oxygen, so we can convert that to energy really quickly. And we don't really need anything going to our digestive system. We don't actually need our thinking brain switched on. We actually only need our automatic response brain working. So we become highly attuned to where the threat might be coming from, but we don't think, we don't analyze it. We're just going, oh, there it is, off we go. So we're getting our bodies ready for that flight or that fight. It needs to be physically ready. So we'll get heart palpitations because we decide that we need our heart needs to beat faster. We need to breathe heavier, so we get more breathing, and we get nausea or pins or various sensations like butterflies in our stomach. We feel tense. We don't feel able to relax. Worrying what others think, worried what's going to happen, fear of the unknown. That worry about what others think is also part of that social anxiety, and that's really high level in menopause, particularly that worrying about what others think, and what's going to happen, fear of the unknown. We do like control, and Antonia will say, Catherine will say, I definitely like control. And not having control really triggers my anxiety in a big way, and I try and wrestle control in all sorts of ways. Fear of the unknown is a regular problem, and quite often linked with panic as well. Throat, panic in chest, and not being able to get words out properly. Yes, because your thinking brain isn't working. You flipped your lid. If you think about your brain as being a fist like this is your brain, the brain that is kind of in reptilian mode down here in terms of your ability to do all of those things that you might need to do as an animal being hunted. And the rest of the brain is the emotional center and the thinking center. Well, when you go into fight, flight, freeze, when your cortisol levels are high, essentially you disconnect this top bit, which is why we call flipping a lid. You've literally disconnected your thinking brain. Those connections are no longer being served. It's only this part of the brain, and this part of the brain is getting the most blood flow to that, so therefore it can work better. So that's why that happens. What else have we got here? Increased heart rate and feeling shaky. Yes, trembling, shaky. That again is about those muscles being piped up, ready to go, and there's too much flow going through those muscles. Palpitations, sweat too. Yes, the sweat glands, again, that's because our vasomotor system has gone into overdrive as well in this process, and that's where that comes from. High heart rate, sweaty palms, intensive thoughts. You see, I get the sweaty palms is something I really get, particularly when I'm watching things that have got high levels in them. So if there's you see these things, don't you, on Instagram and Facebook, where people are riding along narrow paths on their bike that they could fall off instantly if they just slightly slipped, or they're doing a one-handed handstand on the top of a very tall building. Those sorts of things will give me sweaty palms, and that's that stress response. Absolutely. And intensive thoughts. It's intensive and intrusive. They won't go away, will they? And they carry on. And there are things that we can do to take charge of those. Trembling legs, yes. Tight chest, again, linked to that whole thing of fight, flight, freeze. We're tensing up, and our chest feels tight then. Don't want to leave the house. Yes, I had that. And that's the fear of when I leave I'm in my safe place here. Anything outside of here isn't safe, and it's that need for safety. Won't do things I love because of social anxiety. Social anxiety is a real problem, particularly in menopause. Lots of crying, yes, and that's when we get overwhelmed with those hormones. And one of the ways that we have of releasing that is crying. The thoughts can then get a hold of us. It affects our sleeping. Either we can't sleep or we sleep too much. We definitely get tired and our motivation goes. Those things are definitely linked to stress and the stress hormone cortisol. And we've talked earlier about why stress comes in. And the lower levels of estrogen mean our ability to manage the stress situation in a much more controlled manner is reduced. Hence the fact that we get more symptoms. I think I've been going through this for at least 4 years. Okay, Tricia, well, they do talk about menopause. The average age of menopause, and that's the cessation of periods, is 50 or 51. But it can start anything from 35 upwards. Anything below 40 is called early menopause. I would say you're on the earlier side of normal, because normal is 45 to 50. But it can last anything between 1 or 2 to 7 to 10 years. So that can be it. But also our hormones fluctuate naturally. So Gemma, I'm 43 and symptoms have been ongoing for 2 years. So you're similar to Tricia there, aren't you, Gemma? So you can support each other there. Ladies, I'm 50 and this started at 40, but it does get more manageable. I won't tell you all about the 85-year-old lady I spoke to who said she very occasionally still gets weird menopause issues. Do you know what? There's there's some evidence that, we still get strange things going on afterwards because our hormones fluctuate all the time, and hormones can trigger all sorts of different things. It's interesting that literally everything I've got on my list from the research is down on here except for dry mouth. Anybody ever get a dry mouth? I certainly do. Does anybody else ever get that? I mean, I had a whole range of things: tense, nervous, unable to relax. Some of you have said that. Chest pain. We've talked about a tight chest, and I think that's linked really. Overwhelm, self-conscious, fatigue, hyperventilation. These are all, and as I say, one of the things is that social anxiety, I think, is a societal issue, and that increases because of that societal pressure as we get into into perimenopause. My mum still gets hot flushes at 72. Yeah, yes, but I have sleep apnea too. Well, that's not great, is it, Tricia? Sleep apnea. Do you have treatment for that? Because the treatment for that can be very, very effective, can't it, Catherine? Right, so moving on. So when we've talked about what anxiety can feel like, really we want to look at now, and you've all experienced some of those things. Pins and needles can also be a symptom, and again, that's about that blood flow thing and different parts of the body having reduced blood flow, and absolutely right. CPAP, yeah. I was surprised how quiet those are. They're amazingly quiet, and very easy to lull yourself to sleep with. I knows it, but I didn't tell you all of her story. She was lovely. Yeah, but you have told me a lot. Okay, what can we do to help ourselves? That's the important thing, isn't it? Because that's what you really all want to know. One of the things that's very, very common in perimenopause is early morning anxiety. And the reason for that is cortisol is released to wake us up in the morning. And when we have less estrogen in our bodies, we can't moderate that spike. So our estrogen will moderate that spike, but as it lowers and before our body has worked out where it's going to get its estrogen from and balance the systems out again, it can trigger early morning anxiety. And some of you will really love this, Catherine, because the way to get around that is don't drink coffee in the morning, not caffeinated coffee, and go for some exercise. Early morning exercise is apparently a really good cure for early morning anxiety, because exercise releases feel-good hormones. It's really good for us. But exercise in general is a regular exercise that you do, and that can just be walking the dog. I knew you'd say that, Catherine. Regular exercise really helps mood. And I got back to my exercise this morning, as you saw from my photograph if you were on the feed earlier. And it felt good. I definitely felt better than I have been feeling in the mornings. I got up, went to my I didn't really want to get up when I got up, but I got up and I went to my exercise class and I loved it, absolutely loved it, and I felt much, much better than I have been feeling in the mornings. And I know that, but sometimes I just get out of the habit of going. One of the, good for me, yes, sorted. Thank you for the dog, for my dog. They really are good for you. They certainly are. Taking the dog out for a walk, they certainly won't let you not take them, which is the interesting thing. If you want to get up and get your breakfast first, then my dogs will jump all over you and say, excuse me, but it's our walk time. One of the other things we've talked about a lot, and this is amazing for reducing stress, you can do things like yoga, tai chi, build in regular breaks, and by breaks I mean mind and body breaks. So those periods of time in your day when your brain is calm and your body is calm, because those are the bits that I missed. I thought I was doing all of these things. I had exercise, I was being mindful, but the mindful times were when I was swimming and I was exercising, or when I was going for walks, and that's exercise. I wasn't calm body. And the calm body was when I was playing games on my phone. I couldn't switch my brain off, so I'd play games on my phone and then I'd switch my brain off, and my body would be calmer. But you need calm body, calm mind. So really making sure that every single day you get time to yourself, because that's important, and calm body, calm mind. So it could be a soak in a bath, it could be anything, but make sure that's what you're doing. Taking time in the garden helps me. Yes, gardening is a brilliant thing for people, but just sitting in the garden is a really good thing. Sitting in nature. The Japanese talk about forest bathing, and there's a huge amount of evidence that suggests being by the sea, being by running water, or being in green spaces, parks, woodland, is extremely good for you. It releases those feel-good hormones in our bodies and reduces our stress. So it's massively important. The other things that are really good are mindfulness. And remember, we talked about that last week, and that's not about sitting meditating. That's just taking stock of what your body's doing. Breath work, and one of the things that's really good for anxiety is square breathing. And if you don't know what that is, that's essentially breathing in for 4, holding your breath for 4, breathing out for 4, and holding again for 4 before starting again. And if you imagine a square that you're going around the sides of, that's what square breathing is. And that's brilliant for you. Alone can be with your dogs. No, you can have Charlie and Huey there, Antonia. I just mean away from people, because we all need breaks from people. And relaxation techniques, whatever you can do for relaxation, that's brilliant for managing anxiety, because what it does is it lowers the cortisol levels. It allows your adrenal glands to start producing estrogen and the balance to return again, so that you're not in that fight, flight, freeze. So things lower. And that's easier said than done when you're in the realms of constant anxiety. I know that, but there are things you can do, and it's really important they make a difference. I would also say reduce dietary stress. Now, they don't recommend, this is the research I've looked, scientific research would suggest that this fad for the moment for fasting, so, the eating in 8 hours and fasting for the other 16, for example, isn't recommended in perimenopause. And the reason for that is you're more likely to get your sugar spikes and insulin spikes, and those spikes cause stress in the body. And we want to reduce stress. So we need to reduce dietary stress. And so eating small amounts regularly and looking at the balance, the healthy balance of the food that we're eating, makes a massive difference. Getting rid of, not getting rid of, but reducing the amount of caffeine you take, as I said earlier, especially in the morning, reducing the amount of alcohol you take. Our ability to manage alcohol and caffeine in our system reduces because of the different way our hormones are building a balance. And so we can no longer metabolize those as well as we could. And smoking is another thing that actually really affects stress hormones badly, as in it makes them worse. Getting regular sleep. A lot of us in perimenopause have struggle with our sleep. Some of that can be alleviated by getting this balance in terms of our diet, not eating too many carbohydrates before bed, because that will lead to a spike in our sugars, and then a spike in our insulin, which wakes us up early in the morning, because we get a cortisol injection essentially to deal with the levels that we've got in our body. So we wake up, which we don't want to do. So we do need to think about our routines around sleep, because our routines around sleep make a difference. If you're constantly, if you watch telly or scroll your phone straight before you go to bed, you're less likely to fall asleep because of the white light, which mimics daylight. So our brain is conned into thinking it's still daylight when it's not. If you don't have a regular routine, so if you go to bed randomly at different times and get up randomly at different times, your body doesn't get into that right cycle for the hormonal response to trigger sleep and awake. When you're in a pattern, your body wakes you up when it needs to, and it falls asleep when it's used to and expecting it to. So have a look at your sleep routine. Is it regular? Because that makes a massive difference. And if you're not getting enough sleep, your likelihood of anxiety goes through the roof, because we can't manage when we're tired, basically. And overtired, definitely. See, if you banned them from the Mars bars, we might have to think. I haven't banned anybody from Mars bars, but just manage your sugar levels, because you've got to be careful. I don't think anything's bad for you, but excesses can be. Fall asleep in 5 minutes, it's staying asleep that's a problem. So if it's staying asleep that's the problem, then that could be that cortisol levels are kicking in. And so you need to look at that very carefully, because it's cortisol spikes that wake us up. I'm running a campaign for Jane to do the Royal Institute Christmas lectures. Okay, signs you can understand. And so the latter thing that I'm going to look at, and I've not talked about these in the past in terms of menopause, although there's a lot of things out there, but there's a little bit of evidence for the ones I'm going to talk about next, which is supplements or things that we need to include in our diet. So you can look them up both ways. But before I come on to that, I'd really like to know, I've talked about exercise, mindfulness, strategies to manage stress, looking at your diet, reducing your caffeine and sleep. How many of those do you think, there's 6, how many of those do you think that you are aware of and you are looking at in a proactive way? And how many of them are you aware of but you're doing nothing about? I can tell you there's one I'm doing nothing about at the moment, and that's looking at what I eat. And I know that's a really important thing to do, but it's not something that's straightforward. So I want you to have a look at that and think for yourself and let me know. What are you doing out of those? I think I've definitely reduced caffeine and alcohol, and I've never smoked. Sleep, I'm quite good with that. Exercise, I'm back on it. So I reckon I'm on sort of 4 or 5 out of the 6. See where you are and let me know. And then let me know how easy or hard you find it. Yeah, a lot of us are caffeine addicts. I was, and now I'm not. I don't at all. I hardly drink it at all, except when I'm driving at 800 miles in the weekend, and I did drink some caffeine for the last 90 miles, I think. So the caffeine and smoking. Okay, right. So supplements that may work. And the thing is, it's about moderation and it's about being aware, isn't it? If we make decisions and we say, like, I'm aware of the food thing, but I've not really done a major thing about it. I think it's about knowledge, and it's about being aware that you can do things. None of this is preaching to you. This is giving you ideas. And I would never preach to anybody, because we're all individuals and we all do what's right for us. And that's important. That's really important. So I had a look at research on supplements, because that's been out there a lot, okay? And the things that the things that we need to try and get into our diet or via some supplements, or the things that might make a massive difference, is, yes, you're doing food, Antonio, and you found it made a massive difference, haven't you? Which is brilliant. So things that can affect the likelihood of us experience experience anxiety. Where did I just say alcohol from? That's ridiculous. One of them is vitamin D. Now, we all know that we can get vitamin D from sunlight, but we can also get it from foods, animal products, particularly oily fishes like salmon and mackerel. So it's really important to try and include those in your diet. If you're vegan or vegetarian, you're going to find it really hard to get dietary vitamin D. You're also going to find it impossible to get dietary vitamin B. So in those cases, if you're vegan or vegetarian, because our bodies are designed to be omnivores, which means we eat meat and vegetables, because we're designed to be omnivores, our chemical system, our hormone system needs those in order to keep us in balance. So if you are, you need to look at those supplements for those areas, because the likelihood is you're going to be low on them. Some of you, like me, may have an inability to absorb some of those through your gut, or reduce absorption through your gut, and then when you need supplements. So I take a B12 injection every 12 weeks because my body doesn't absorb enough B12. One of the other things that you need is magnesium. By the way, the B vitamins are massively involved in how the brain works, so that's why they're highly important. Magnesium is a key element that's involved in a lot of the body systems. A lot of the chemical messaging needs magnesium in there. There's an amino acid called L-theanine, which is also really important. And again, that's mostly in animal products. Then there's omega-3, which we know is in things like fish, oily fish, and also seeds and plants like flax and things like that. And then there are some plants that we can use as chamomile tea. Chamomile tea is proven to reduce anxiety. There is evidence for chamomile tea reducing anxiety. There is also some evidence to suggest that for some people, smelling lavender oil, so that aromatherapy, can have a calming effect. So absolutely, that one. And lemon balm as well can have a calming effect on you. So be aware of those. Those are the ones with evidence. There's a lot more things out there that are promoted by various people to be excellent for menopause. They're either not proven, or there are actually some health concerns with them. But also be aware that when you're taking supplements, so this isn't when you're using it in your food, but when you're taking supplements, some supplements, and quite a lot of supplements, will interact with the way other medication that you may be taking, either over the counter or prescription, will operate. So I would suggest that if you're considering supplements, you always seek medical advice, just to make sure that you're not causing an issue with something else that you're taking, or you might take. So the sorts of foods are things like oily fish, meat and dairy products, and then a varied fruit and vegetable diet, and making sure you've got a lot of fibre. And we want more complex carbs, so things like sweet potato, and less simple carbs like sugars, or carbs like rice, pasta, white pasta, potato. I'm not saying no, just keep them. Be mindful of the fact that they're foods linked to sugar spikes, and therefore a higher link to things like pre-diabetes and type 2 diabetes. And so we're wanting whole wheat foods. We're wanting things like quinoa, spinach, almonds, cashews, dark chocolate. Dark chocolate is brilliant for magnesium, so are black beans, as well as spinach and wheat. So Catherine, if you're ever low on magnesium, you're okay because you've got your dark chocolate. Green and black tea. It's really good for us. Again, it's one of those things that's proven to reduce anxiety. And flax seeds, that's what you want to be coming in. If you're going to take a multivitamin, then the best combination of multivitamin that you can take, vitamin and minerals, is one that contains vitamin B, vitamin C, calcium, magnesium, and zinc. Again, seek medical advice, as I said, but that combination seems to be the magic bullet in terms of anxiety, and for particularly anxiety in perimenopause. So those are the suggestions I have. Now, I'm really curious as to whether people have found any of what I've said helpful. If there's particular things that you think, I'm going to try that, or I'm going to do more of that, or I'm going to do less of that, then let me know. Vitamin B12 injections make a difference to me, and collagen powder helped me with joint pain. Absolutely, Andrea. The other thing is, you have to be aware that vitamin B12 is currently a health thing that people are doing. So people are going to health clinics and getting their feel-good injection of B12. It's supposed to be a mood booster, but the thing about that is, if you don't have a low B12, it's very easy to have levels of B12 in your system, which can be negative to you, because they will have a poisoning effect on the way your system works. So be very, very careful with that. I should write a book. Well, that is on my to-do list, actually, Antonia. So yeah, I've started thinking that that's not a bad idea, except I don't like writing. Very interesting. Some things resonating. Excellent. That's what I like to hear. Some things resonating. If you were going to take one thing away from today's session, what would that one thing be? Let me know. So if you're going to take one thing away from today's session, what would that one thing be? Let me know. Crack on. Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Antonia. And maybe I could have a ghostwriter. Are you any good at writing books, Antonia? The thing about smoking, for example, is that it's addictive, isn't it? And when we give up, it adds to our stress levels. And similarly, sort of reducing our caffeine. To start with, we feel like we're addicted to it, because we are addicted to it. We need it. And so we have to be mindful that process of reducing some of those things. Yes, some of the omegas, yes, the omega oils, omega-3 particularly, omega-6 as well in terms of regulating some of the hormones, but for anxiety it's omega-3 that comes in, which is where the oily fish comes in as well, and the flax seeds and the like. They're all rich in omega-3. Okay, so where are we with this? Look at my diet. Yes, that's the thing I need to do as well. My goal is to replace my coffee with chamomile. Oh, wow. Okay, that's impressive. Maybe just start with one replacement. Chamomile in the evening, because it's calming as well. So it's calming and it will help you sleep. Eat with care and thought. Absolutely. Where's that? What's Tracy said about dark chocolate? I've just seen that. And collagen powder. Dark chocolate and collagen powder. Yes. You did have a ghostwriter contact you last week. That's what got me thinking, to be honest, Antonia. And I think the other thing is, sometimes we don't feel we have control over our environment. So rather than worrying about the bigger picture, just take one thing that you can do that's little, because every little step counts. It's like that phrase, around how do you eat an elephant? You'd eat an elephant one bite at a time. So please don't put too much pressure on yourself. It's one thing, and it's one thing only that I would suggest that you look at. And to be honest, when I've talked about these, in most occasions, the one thing that you might do will do all of it. You know, and if there's two things that people should look at, is the stress in their life and the diet. And those are the two in terms of sugars and simple carbohydrates. So simple carbohydrates, particularly in the caffeines, because those are the two biggest things that will influence how you experience any of the symptoms of menopause. And anxiety and stress are so hugely linked that I would suggest stress. Switch to dark chocolate covered nuts. Well, my problem is I don't like dark chocolate. And the two nuts that they're suggested, which are almonds and cashews, I don't like. So I've got a real problem with that, haven't I? So, yeah. But everybody, thank you for attending. It's been great again. Thank you for your interaction and also the sort of support you've given each other in the chat. I will have a look at what you've written and get back to you on some of those things. But have a great evening, and tomorrow we've got all of those things that, you know, each of you have decided there's one thing. Start by looking at tomorrow. Brazils. Now, I don't like nuts, Catherine. This is the main problem. I like peanuts, but they're not really nuts. So thank you, very interesting. Thank you very much, everybody, and good evening and goodbye.